A very good morning to you and welcome to my thought for the day. Today I'm looking at a very well-known passage in John chapter 2 when Jesus attended a wedding feast and they ran out of wine. He attended the feast with his mother and his disciples, John chapter 2 verses 1 to 11, and they ran out of wine. And we know that his mother told the servants to do whatever Jesus told them to do. And there were 6 stone jars standing there, each holding 20 to 30 gallons. Now, that depends on what your measure is. Your Bible will tell you, hopefully, how much that was in your understanding. In England, we have pints and gallons, and now we have litres, which mean nothing to me because I was brought up on pints and gallons. But let me tell you, this is an enormous amount of liquid in these 6 jars. Huge amounts. Now the wedding feast, these wedding feasts lasted several days, and they'd had lots of wine and they'd run out. And Jesus tells them to fill the jars with water. And they fill them up, and he tells them to draw some out and take it to the steward of the feast. So they took it. When the steward of the feast tasted the water, now become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, "Every man serves the good wine first, and when men have drunk freely, then the poor wine, but you've kept the good wine until now." This, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested his glory. What an amazing thing Jesus did. Now, I want to read you a bit from C.S. Lewis about this before I make my comments. He has a wonderful point to make about this. The good wine, it's from God in the Dock, in Miracles, his book called Miracles. God creates the vine and teaches it to draw up water by its roots, and with the aid of the sun to turn that water into a juice which will ferment and take on certain qualities. Thus every year from Noah's time till ours, God turns water into wine. That men fail to see. Either like the pagans, they refer the process to some spirit, Bacchus or Dionysius, or else, like the moderns, they attribute real and ultimate causality to the chemical and other material phenomenon, which are all that our senses can discover in it. But when Christ at Cana made water into wine, the mask is off. The miracle has only half its effect if it only convinces us that Christ is God. It will have its full effect if whenever we see a vineyard or drink a glass of wine, we remember that here works he who sat at the wedding party in Cana. So what he's saying is that God had already put in place into the process, into the vine. There's a lot in the scripture about the vine. The vine was a very important plant. And indeed in John chapter 15, we are told that Jesus said, "I am the vine." So right at the beginning of his ministry, he is using his authority as the vine to turn water into wine. And yet that process happens naturally. Nobody's ever thought about why it happens or how it happens. How does grape juice turn into wine? It's something that God created. He started it. He did the process. And the miracle here is that Jesus did it in a moment, where it takes a very long time to turn, and a process and everything, to turn water into wine. And you do need the grapes to do it. Jesus turns the water into wine without the aid of anything, just the aid of obedient people doing exactly what he told them to do. This is an incredible miracle. Jesus turned water into wine. And it does tell us several things about God. That I think in a way it's a picture of God's relationship with his people, Israel. His people were called the vine in Isaiah 5. And God planted a vineyard and he expected good grapes. And he got sour grapes. And all through the Old Testament is God speaking to, trying to woo his people back to himself unsuccessfully. And at the last, when they've run out of everything else, God gives his best. And God sent prophet after prophet after prophet to his people to bring them back. But in the end, he sent the very best to them. He sent Jesus, the best wine, kept until last. Here is Jesus coming to his people, declaring who he is, showing who he is. I don't think anyone would have invited Jesus to a wedding if he was a killjoy, if he was someone who was miserable and never laughed. I think Jesus was the most wonderful wedding guest. And here he is, the provider. God will always provide what we need, but we do need to ask him. God likes to be asked. He knows everything we need. He knows everything about us. He knows when we run out of things and when we need help. And it's our pride that gets in the way, that says, I don't need help. Other people may need to ask God into the situation, but I'm managing on my own. Don't ever manage on your own. It's a waste of time, because you're going to run out sooner or later. And very often it's when people run out, when they reach the end of themselves, when they've got no more resources left, when they've tried everything and none of it has worked, that they turn to Jesus. It's such a shame that that's how our human nature often is, that we would resist cooperating with God and working with God to the very end, and only when we're desperate do we ask him for help. What a pity that we don't ask him for help at the beginning and save ourselves all that pain and agony. It's a wonderful story, isn't it? A huge generosity of God to give his best. Give his best. What more is there to say? Read it. Let God speak to you again. There's mystery in the words of God written down for us. There's significance in almost every word of this story, including the first phrase, John 2 verse 1, on the third day. There's a lot of things that happened on the third day. Have a great day. God bless you. Bye-bye.